I stood in my beautifully renovated condo kitchen, clutching the final mortgage payment receipt with trembling hands as tears of pure joy streamed down my cheeks. 3 years of brutal overtime shifts, skipped meals, and endless ramen dinners had finally paid off. This moment represented everything I had sacrificed for. Then Derek walked through my front door with his sister Madison, her husband Troy, and their twin boys Carson and Blake, trailing behind with suitcases and moving boxes. Madison's voice cut through my celebration like a knife as she announced they were moving in permanently because family properties should benefit everyone, not just one selfish person. The words hit me like a physical blow. Madison stood in my entryway, her arms crossed and chin raised, with that familiar look of superiority she always wore during family gatherings. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she wore an expensive designer jacket that I knew cost more than my monthly grocery budget during the lean years. "Derek told me all about your little mortgage situation, Gail," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Honestly, it's about time someone brought some perspective to this whole arrangement." I turned to my husband, searching his face for any sign that this was some kind of sick joke. Derek avoided my eyes, fidgeting with his car keys and staring at the hardwood floors I had refinished with my own hands last summer. His silence spoke volumes. "What arrangement?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible over the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Madison pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her purse with theatrical flourish. "This arrangement," she announced, unfolding what appeared to be a handwritten document. "Derek signed this agreement with me 4 months ago, promising that our family could live here rent-free for as long as we needed." My legs nearly buckled beneath me. 4 months ago was exactly when I had been working double shifts at the marketing firm, pushing myself to the breaking point to make that final payment. While I was sacrificing my health and sanity, my own husband was secretly plotting to give away everything I had worked for. Derek helped with a down payment years ago. Madison continued, her voice gaining momentum like a freight train. "That makes this condo a family investment, not your personal property. We're just claiming what's rightfully ours." The room began to spin as the full weight of her words sank in. Troy Madison's unemployed husband was already hauling boxes through my front door, his heavy work boots leaving scuff marks on the pristine floors. He was a large man with calloused hands and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, the kind of person who seemed to take up more space than his actual size warranted. "Mom, can I have the room with the big window?" Carson called out, his voice echoing from what used to be my home office. At 12 years old, he had inherited his mother's sense of entitlement and his father's complete disregard for other people's belongings. "That's my office." I protested weakly, but Madison waved my concerns away with a dismissive hand gesture. "Was your office," she corrected. "Children need proper bedrooms, Gail. Surely you understand that family comes first." Blake Carson's twin brother appeared in the doorway with my laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "Where should I put this stuff?" he asked his mother, completely ignoring my presence, despite the fact that we were standing in my own living room. "Just set it in the garage for now," Madison replied casually, as if she were directing the placement of her own possessions. "We'll sort through everything later and decide what stays and what goes." The casual cruelty of that statement hit me harder than any physical blow could have. 3 years of my life, every sacrifice I had made, every dream I had nurtured, about finally having a space that was truly mine. All of it was being dismissed as easily as discarding yesterday's newspaper. Derek finally spoke, his voice barely above a mumble. "Gail, I know this seems sudden, but Madison's family really needs this right now. Troy lost his job last month and they can't afford their apartment anymore. We're family. We have to help each other. Help each other." I repeated, my voice growing stronger as anger began to replace shock. "I've been helping by working myself into the ground to pay for this place while you apparently promised it away behind my back." Madison's expression hardened. "Don't be dramatic, Gail. This is about being part of a real family, something you've never really understood. Derek and I grew up knowing that family takes care of family. Our mother taught us that individual wants always come second to collective needs. She moved through my kitchen with the confidence of someone who already considered it her own territory, opening cabinets and examining the contents with a critical eye. We'll need to make some changes, of course. This layout doesn't really work for a family with children, and some of this furniture will have to go. It's not very practical for everyday living. I watched in stunned silence as my carefully curated home, the sanctuary I had built through years of hard work and careful planning, was being systematically evaluated and found wanting by people who had contributed nothing to its creation. Troy returned from another trip to their car this time carrying what appeared to be a television that was significantly larger than the modest one I had saved up to buy 2 years ago. "Where do you want the entertainment center set up, babe?" he called to Madison. "The living room, obviously," she replied, then turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You don't mind if we rearrange things a bit, do you, Gail? After all, we're all going to be living here together now." That night, after Madison's family had claimed the master bedroom and relegated Derek and me to the small guest room, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and trying to process what had happened. The house felt different, already filled with unfamiliar sounds and the constant presence of people who treated my space as if it had always belonged to them. When Derek finally came to bed at nearly 2 in the morning, I was ready with questions that had been burning in my mind for hours. "You need to explain this to me," I said, sitting up and turning on the bedside lamp. "When you helped with the down payment, there was never any mention of conditions or future claims on the property." Derek sat heavily on the edge of the bed, his shoulders sagging with what I initially mistook for remorse. "It's complicated, Gail. Madison's been having a really hard time financially, and I've been trying to help where I can." "Help how?" I pressed through something in his evasive tone made my stomach clench with dread. "Just small amounts here and there," he said, still not meeting my eyes. "Nothing that would affect our budget significantly." The next morning, while Madison supervised her children's destruction of my home office and Derek conveniently left early for work, I decided to examine our financial records more carefully. What I found in Derek's desk drawer made my blood run cold. Hidden beneath a stack of old utility bills were bank statements for an account I had never seen before. Derek had been systematically transferring money from our joint savings account to what appeared to be a private account, and from there, regular payments were being made to Madison's family. The amounts were staggering. Over the past 2 years, while I'd been working overtime and denying myself even small luxuries to make our mortgage payments, Derek had transferred over $30,000 to his sister. $30,000 that could have paid off our condo months earlier. $30,000 that represented countless hours of my overtime work and sacrifice. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by evidence of my husband's betrayal and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just about Madison's sudden claim on my home. This was about a pattern of deception that had been going on for years while I struggled to build our financial security. Madison found me there an hour later, still staring at the bank statement spread across the table. She glanced at the papers with a knowing smirk that told me she was fully aware of Derek's secret financial support. "I see you've discovered Derek's little supplemental income program," she said, helping herself to coffee from my kitchen. "He's such a generous brother. Always has been ever since we were kids." "This is our money," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "Money I earned working extra shifts while you were apparently living off our savings." Madison shrugged, settling into one of my chairs as if she belonged there. "Derek wanted to help. He knew how much our family was struggling, especially after Troy lost his construction job. Family helps family, Gail. That's how real families work." "Real families," I repeated, incredulous. "Real families don't lie and steal from each other." "Nobody's stealing anything," Madison replied coolly. "Derek was helping his sister during a difficult time. The fact that you're upset about it just shows how little you understand about family loyalty." She reached across the table and gathered up the bank statements, tucking them into her pocket with casual ownership. Besides, Derek should have consulted with family before making such a big financial commitment as buying a condo. This place should have been a family decision from the beginning. I bought this condo, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. I made the down payment. I've made every single mortgage payment for 5 years. I've maintained it and improved it with my own hands and my own money. Madison laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or humor. Oh, sweetie, that's not how marriage works. What's Derek's is Derek's, and what Derek chooses to share with his family is Derek's decision. You're part of this family now, which means you need to learn to think beyond your own selfish interests. As if summoned by our raised voices, Troy appeared in the kitchen doorway. His presence immediately changed the dynamic in the room, his large frame and crossed arms, creating an unspoken threat that made the space feel smaller and more oppressive. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly interested in my well-being. "Gail's just having a little trouble adjusting to the new living arrangements." Madison explained, her voice taking on a sickeningly sweet tone. "I was just explaining how family dynamics work." Troy nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense. "Yeah, it takes time to get used to having kids around. They're good boys, but they're energetic. Growing boys need space to be boys, you know." As if to emphasize his point, a loud crash echoed from the direction of my former office, followed by Carson's voice calling out, "It's okay, Mom. Nothing important broke." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to center myself in the midst of what felt like a complete invasion of everything I had worked to build. When I opened them again, Madison was watching me with an expression that was part pity and part satisfaction. "The sooner you accept that this is how things are now, the happier everyone will be," she said, standing and brushing imaginary crumbs from her designer jeans. "We're all family here, and family shares everything." 3 days into what Madison cheerfully referred to as the new living arrangement, I came home from work to find a stranger sitting at my kitchen table. He was a thin man in an expensive suit with graying hair and the kind of smile that immediately put me on edge. A leather briefcase sat open beside him, filled with official-looking documents. "Gail," Madison called out cheerfully as I stood frozen in my own doorway. "Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet Patrick Westbrook. He's our family attorney." Patrick stood and extended his hand, which I ignored. Something about the calculated way he assessed me made my skin crawl. "Ms. Morrison, I've heard so much about you. Your husband and sister-in-law have filled me in on your unique situation." My unique situation. I repeated, setting my purse down slowly and trying to process why there was a lawyer in my kitchen discussing my personal business. "Please sit down," Patrick said, gesturing to a chair at my own table. "We have some important matters to discuss regarding the property ownership of this condominium." Madison was practically vibrating with excitement as she took her seat across from me. Derek sat beside her, his face pale and his hands fidgeting nervously with a pen. It was clear that whatever was about to happen, he was a willing participant despite his obvious discomfort. Patrick opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder filled with documents. "I've been reviewing the ownership history of this property, and there are some significant irregularities that need to be addressed." He spread several papers across the table, each one covered in legal language that might as well have been written in a foreign language. The documents appeared official, complete with notarized signatures and legal seals, but something about them felt wrong in a way I couldn't immediately identify. These documents clearly show that Madison Morrison has held a 50% stake in this property since the original purchase. Patrick continued, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to being believed without question. "The irregular mortgage payments and recent payoff have created some confusion, but legally speaking, this has always been a jointly owned property." I stared at the papers, my mind reeling. The signatures looked authentic and the dates corresponded with our original purchase, but I knew with absolute certainty that Madison had never been involved in buying this condo. I had signed every document, made every payment, and handled every aspect of the purchase myself. "This is impossible," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Madison wasn't even living in this state when we bought this place. She's never contributed a single dollar to this property. Patrick's expression remained neutral, but I caught a glimmer of something calculating in his eyes. Memory can be unreliable, especially during stressful financial periods. These documents speak for themselves, and they're legally binding. Derek finally spoke, his voice shaky and uncertain. "Gail, I know this is confusing, but Madison did help with some of the financial arrangements back then. Maybe not in ways that were obvious to you, but she was involved behind the scenes. The betrayal in that moment was so complete that I felt physically sick. My own husband was sitting at my kitchen table supporting a lie that would rob me of everything I had worked for. Madison watched my reaction with undisguised satisfaction, clearly enjoying my shock and helplessness. The good news," Patrick continued shuffling through more papers, "is that we're prepared to offer you a reasonable settlement that would allow you to maintain some financial interest in the property, while acknowledging Ms. Madison Morrison's legitimate ownership claims." He slid another document toward me, this one labeled as a property settlement agreement. The terms were insulting beyond belief. I would be allowed to remain in the condo as a renter, paying monthly rent to Madison's family while surrendering all ownership rights. "This is insane," I said, standing up abruptly and backing away from the table. "These documents are fake. I don't know how you created them, but I know they're not real." Patrick's expression hardened slightly. "I understand you're emotional about this situation, but making accusations about document fraud is a serious matter. These papers have been properly filed with the county recorder's office and are part of the official property record." Madison leaned forward, her eyes bright with false concern. "Gail, we're trying to be fair here. We could insist on our full legal rights, but we're family. We want to find a solution that works for everyone. Your full legal rights to a property you've never owned." I shot back, my voice rising with each word. "To a home I've lived in and maintained and sacrificed for while you were living 3 states away." "The documents clearly show," Patrick began, but I cut him off. "The documents show lies," I said firmly, "and I'm going to prove it." Patrick exchanged a meaningful look with Madison before closing his briefcase with deliberate slowness. "Ms. Morrison, I strongly advise you to consider our offer carefully. Fighting this in court would be extremely expensive and time-consuming. Even if you could afford proper legal representation, which frankly seems unlikely based on your financial situation, the outcome is far from certain." He stood and straightened his tie, his movements calculated to convey authority and control. Property disputes can drag on for years, accumulating legal fees that often exceed the value of the property itself. Meanwhile, you'd be living in a hostile environment with people who have legitimate claims on the space you're occupying. The threat was clear, even wrapped in legal language, and delivered with a professional smile. Madison's family wasn't just claiming my home, they were prepared to make my life miserable until I surrendered. As Patrick left, Madison walked him to the door with the kind of casual familiarity that suggested this wasn't their first meeting. I could hear them talking in low voices on my front porch, making plans and arrangements about my future, without any input from me. When she returned to the kitchen, Derek had disappeared, probably unable to face the consequences of his betrayal. Madison sat back down at the table and began organizing the legal papers with the satisfied efficiency of someone who had just won a significant victory. "You know, Gail," she said without looking up, "this doesn't have to be unpleasant. We're reasonable people. We just want what's rightfully ours." The next morning, I arrived at work, hoping to find some refuge from the chaos that had taken over my personal life. The marketing firm where I worked as a coordinator had always been a place where I felt competent and valued, where my hard work was recognized and appreciated. But as I walked through the office doors, I immediately sensed that something was wrong. My coworkers avoided making eye contact, and the usual morning chatter died down when I passed by their desks. Janet Williams. My supervisor appeared at my cubicle within minutes of my arrival, her expression serious and concerned. "Gail, we need to talk." she said, her voice carrying an undertone that made my stomach drop. "Can you come to my office, please?" Janet was a fair woman in her early 50s who'd always supported my work and advocated for my advancement within the company. She'd been instrumental in helping me secure the overtime hours that made my final mortgage payments possible. But today she looked uncomfortable and distant as she closed her office door behind us. I received some concerning phone calls yesterday evening. She began settling behind her desk and folding her hands in a way that immediately put me on defensive alert. Someone claiming to be a family member contacted me about your current living situation and some legal issues you're apparently facing. My heart sank as I realized what had happened. Madison's reach extended far beyond my personal life. She was systematically attacking every aspect of my stability and security. "What exactly did they tell you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. Janet consulted a notepad on her desk, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. The caller identified herself as Madison Morrison, your sister-in-law. She expressed concern about your mental state and your ability to maintain professional responsibilities while dealing with what she described as a family crisis. She had no right to contact my employer. I said, my voice sharper than I intended. My personal life has never interfered with my work performance. "I know that Gail and I told her as much," Janet replied, her tone softening slightly. "But she was quite persistent. She mentioned something about legal proceedings and financial instability, and she suggested that you might be facing eviction due to what she called irresponsible financial decisions." The calculated cruelty of Madison's attack took my breath away. She wasn't content with stealing my home. She was trying to destroy my livelihood as well, cutting off every possible avenue for me to fight back or rebuild my life. She also mentioned that you've been under significant stress and that your family is worried about your ability to handle additional responsibilities. Janet continued, clearly reluctant to share these details, but feeling obligated to address them. "Given that we were considering you for the senior coordinator position next month—" "No," I said quickly, understanding immediately where this was heading. "Janet, please don't let her lies affect my career. My work speaks for itself. I've never missed a deadline, never failed to meet my obligations." Janet sighed heavily, the weight of the situation clearly troubling her. "Gail, I've also received calls from 2 of our major clients. Someone contacted them suggesting they might want to consider working with a different coordinator, someone more stable and reliable," was how it was phrased. The room felt like it was closing in around me. Madison hadn't just made a few random phone calls. She had conducted a systematic campaign to undermine my professional reputation. She had somehow identified my key clients and planted seeds of doubt about my competence and reliability. The Henderson account specifically asked to be reassigned to someone else. Janet continued, her voice growing quieter. "They mentioned receiving information about potential legal issues that might affect your availability and focus. The Henderson account was my biggest success story, a client I had worked with for 2 years and had built into one of the firm's most profitable relationships. Losing them would be a devastating blow to my professional standing and would likely affect my year-end bonus money I desperately needed now more than ever." "This is harassment," I said, my voice barely controlled. "She's systematically attacking my life because I won't surrender my home to her family." Janet nodded sympathetically, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "I believe you, Gail, but I have to consider the welfare of the company as well. If clients are uncomfortable or if there are ongoing legal issues that might affect your work—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. My job, the foundation of my financial independence, and my only hope for fighting Madison's claims, was now in jeopardy because of her malicious interference. "I need to ask you to take some time off," Janet said, finally, the words clearly difficult for her to say. "Just a few days while we sort this out. Let things settle down and give you a chance to address whatever's happening in your personal life." Time off in corporate speak often meant the beginning of the end. I knew that if I left now with doubt planted about my stability and reliability, it would be easy for the company to find reasons not to bring me back. As I cleaned out my desk drawers under the curious stares of my coworkers, I felt the walls closing in from every direction. Madison had effectively cut off my income, damaged my professional reputation, and created doubt about my mental stability, all while positioning herself as a concerned family member trying to help during a difficult time. When I arrived home that afternoon, Madison was in my kitchen again, this time on the phone with someone else. She looked up when I entered and gave me a smile that was pure malice, disguised as sympathy. "Oh, she just walked in," Madison said to whoever was on the other end of the call. "Yes, she looks very stressed. I'm really worried about her mental state. Family situations like this can be so difficult to handle." She hung up and turned to me with false concern. "How was work today, Gail?" "You look tired. Maybe you should consider taking some time off to focus on your health and get this family situation resolved." The casual way she acknowledged her sabotage while maintaining her facade of caring made me realize I was dealing with someone far more dangerous and calculating than I had initially understood. Madison wasn't just greedy. She was methodically destroying my life with the precision of someone who had done this before. That evening, Derek finally approached me as I sat alone on what used to be my back patio, now cluttered with Madison's family's outdoor furniture and the boys' bicycles. He looked haggard, like he hadn't slept properly in days, and kept glancing back toward the house as if afraid Madison might overhear our conversation. "Gail, we need to talk," he said, settling into the chair beside me with obvious reluctance. "I know you're angry and I understand why, but there are things about my family that you don't know." I turned to look at my husband, this man I had loved and trusted for 7 years, and tried to find some trace of the person I had married. "What things, Derek? What could possibly justify what you've done?" Derek ran his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture I had seen countless times during our marriage. But tonight it seemed different, desperate rather than merely anxious. "It's about my mother, about what she wanted for our family before she died." Helen Morrison had passed away 3 years earlier, shortly after Derek and I were married. I had liked her during our brief interactions, finding her warm and welcoming, though Madison had dominated most family gatherings with her dramatic stories and constant demands for attention. "Mom made me promise to take care of Madison." Derek continued, his voice barely audible over the sound of the boys playing loudly in the house behind us. "She was worried about Madison's financial stability and her ability to provide for Carson and Blake. She made me swear that I would always make sure Madison's family was secure." "That doesn't give you the right to promise away our home," I replied, though something in Derek's tone made me suspect there was more to this story. Derek fidgeted with his wedding ring, spinning it around his finger in a motion that had become almost constant over the past few days. "You don't understand how persuasive Madison can be when she wants something. She's been reminding me constantly about Mom's final wishes, about how disappointed Mom would be if she knew I was putting my wife's comfort ahead of my sister's children's welfare." "Your wife's comfort?" I repeated, incredulous. "Derek, this isn't about comfort. This is about the home I've worked myself to exhaustion to pay for. This is about my financial security and my future." "I know," Derek said quickly, "but Madison keeps saying that Mom would want the family to stay together, that she would want us to share our blessings with family members who are struggling. Every time I try to stand up to her, she brings up something Mom said or did that makes me feel guilty for even questioning her." I studied Derek's face in the growing twilight, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the way his shoulders sagged with what appeared to be genuine distress. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wondered if my husband might be as much a victim of Madison's manipulation as I was. "What exactly did your mother say to you?" I asked, my anger softening slightly as I recognized the pain in his expression. Derek was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands, as if the words were too difficult to speak aloud. "She called me to her bedside the night before she died and made me promise that I would always protect Madison from her own poor decisions. She said Madison had always been impulsive with money and relationships, and that without strong family support, she would end up homeless with 2 small children." "That still doesn't justify—" "There's more." Derek interrupted, his voice cracking slightly. Madison has been telling me that Mom specifically mentioned you, that she was worried you might not understand family loyalty because you grew up as an only child. She said Mom was concerned that you might try to keep me from helping my sister when she needed it most. The manipulation was so elegant in its cruelty that I almost admired Madison's skill. She had taken Derek's grief over his mother's death and twisted it into a weapon against our marriage, using his love for his deceased parent to justify increasingly outrageous demands. Derek, I said gently, do you actually remember your mother saying those things about me, or are you remembering Madison telling you that she said them? Derek's face went pale as the implications of my question sank in. It was such a difficult time. Mom was on so much pain medication and Madison was handling most of the communication with the family. I trusted her to tell me what Mom wanted. Of course you did, I said, reaching over to take his hand. She's your sister. You had no reason to think she would lie about something so important. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I had married, the person who had supported my dreams and celebrated my achievements. But then Madison's voice called from inside the house, sharp and demanding. Derek, can you come help Troy with the entertainment center and ask Gail if she knows where the good dishes are stored? The boys want to eat dinner off real plates, not these cheap, everyday ones. Derek's face immediately closed off again, the moment of clarity disappearing as quickly as it had come. She's just trying to make the boys feel at home, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. They've been through a lot with the move and Troy losing his job. I watched him stand and walk back toward the house, his shoulders once again carrying the weight of obligations he didn't fully understand. Madison met him at the sliding door, slipping her arm through his in a gesture that looked affectionate, but struck me as possessive. There you are, she said loud enough for me to hear clearly. I was just telling the boys how lucky they are to have such a generous uncle, someone who understands that family comes first no matter what. She glanced back at me with a smile that held no warmth, her message unmistakable. She owned Derek's loyalty now, and she wanted me to know it. Later that night, unable to sleep in the cramped guest room that now served as my bedroom, I decided to search through Derek's belongings for any evidence of his mother's actual wishes. If Madison had been lying about Helen's final requests, there might be something. Letters, documents, anything that could help Derek see the truth. In the back of Derek's closet, hidden beneath a box of old college textbooks, I found a small wooden box I had never seen before. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all written in Helen's careful handwriting and addressed to Derek. The dates showed they had been written during the final months of her illness. My hands trembling, I opened the most recent letter dated just days before Helen's death. What I read there changed everything I thought I knew about this situation. The letters revealed a truth that made Madison's betrayal even more devastating. Helen Morrison had indeed been worried about her family's future, but her concerns were focused on Derek, not Madison. In letter after letter, she expressed her joy about Derek's marriage to me, calling me the daughter she had always hoped for, and praising my work ethic and dedication. Most importantly, Helen had specifically warned Derek about Madison's manipulative tendencies and her history of taking advantage of family members' generosity. She had left Derek a small inheritance, $10,000 that was meant to be kept separate from Madison's knowledge, and explicitly instructed him to use it to build a secure future with me. That inheritance had never been mentioned to me, and given the bank statements I had found, I suspected it had already been transferred to Madison, along with everything else. The next morning, armed with this new knowledge, I confronted Derek before he could leave for work. I showed him his mother's actual words, watching as the color drained from his face and the full scope of Madison's deception became clear. "She lied to me," he whispered, holding one of his mother's letters with shaking hands. "Mom never said any of those things about you. She never wanted me to choose Madison over my marriage." "Derek, we can fix this," I said, hope rising in my chest for the first time in days. "We can show these letters to a real lawyer, prove that Madison has been manipulating you, and get our home back." But before Derek could respond, we heard a tremendous crash from the direction of the guest bathroom, followed by Carson's voice yelling, "Oops, the water's everywhere!" We rushed toward the sound to find the bathroom flooded water pouring through the ceiling into the hallway below. The toilet had somehow been disconnected from its base, and water was gushing across the floor with alarming speed. "What happened?" I demanded, but Carson just shrugged with the casual indifference of a child who knew he wouldn't face any real consequences. "I was just trying to see how the plumbing worked," he said. "Blake dared me to take it apart. We didn't think it would break this bad." Blake appeared in the doorway, his clothes soaked and his expression more annoyed than apologetic. "Carson's stupid," he announced. "He used the wrong wrench. I told him to use the smaller one." Madison arrived moments later, surveying the destruction with what appeared to be genuine surprise, though something about her reaction felt calculated rather than spontaneous. "Oh no," she said, her voice heavy with false concern. "This is terrible. Gail, do you have good homeowner's insurance?" The question sent a chill down my spine. Why would you ask about insurance before asking if your children are hurt? "The boys are obviously fine," Madison replied dismissively, "but this kind of water damage can be extremely expensive to repair. You'll want to call your insurance company right away to start the claim process." As I reached for my phone to call my insurance agent, Madison continued talking her words, carefully chosen to sound helpful, while delivering devastating news. Although now that I think about it, didn't Derek mention that there were some changes to the insurance policy recently? Something about updating the coverage to reflect the new living arrangement. Derek's face went white. "Madison, you said you were just adding your family to the policy as additional residents. You didn't say anything about changing the actual coverage." "I may have misunderstood the options," Madison said with a shrug that suggested she understood them perfectly well. "Insurance policies are so complicated, but don't worry, I'm sure everything will work out fine." My call to the insurance company confirmed my worst fears. The policy had been canceled 3 days earlier at Madison's request, ostensibly to be replaced with a new policy that never actually materialized. I was now personally liable for thousands of dollars in water damage with no insurance coverage to help. "This is ridiculous," Derek said, his voice rising as he finally began to grasp the full extent of his sister's manipulation. "Madison, you can't just cancel someone else's insurance policy." "I was listed as an authorized contact," Madison replied coolly. "I thought I was helping by finding better coverage options. How was I supposed to know the boys would have an accident on the same week?" The timing was too convenient to be coincidental, and the casual way Madison dismissed the massive expense told me this had been planned. She was systematically destroying my financial stability, creating crisis after crisis that would force me to drain my savings and weaken my ability to fight her legal claims. Over the next several hours, as emergency restoration crews worked to minimize the water damage, the destruction continued in more subtle ways. Troy, accidentally, put his elbow through the drywall while moving furniture to protect it from the flooding. Madison's coffee cup somehow slipped from her hands, staining the carpet in my bedroom with a dark brown mark that would clearly require professional cleaning. Carson and Blake took advantage of the chaos to explore areas of the house that had previously been off limits, somehow managing to scratch the hardwood floors with their skateboard wheels and knock over a bookshelf in the living room. Each incident was dismissed as an accident, but the cumulative effect was clear. My beautiful, carefully maintained home was being transformed into a disaster zone. "Don't worry about the repair costs," Madison said as the restoration crew packed up their equipment late that evening. "Troy's handy with home improvement projects. He can fix most of this damage himself for just the cost of materials." I looked around at what had been my sanctuary just a week earlier, now waterlogged and scarred beyond recognition. The financial impact would be devastating, but the emotional toll was even worse. Madison wasn't just claiming my home. She was systematically destroying everything I had built, erasing my presence from the space I had created with my own hands and dreams. Besides, Madison continued, her voice taking on that familiar tone of false concern, This kind of maintenance is exactly why families need to pool their resources. Home ownership is such a big responsibility for one person to handle alone. The following weekend brought Derek's father's 70th birthday celebration, an event I had been dreading since receiving the invitation 2 weeks earlier. Under normal circumstances, I enjoyed spending time with Derek's extended family, but I knew Madison had been working her manipulation magic on them just as effectively as she had on Derek. The party was held at Derek's Aunt Susan's house, a sprawling ranch home that had hosted family gatherings for as long as Derek could remember. As we pulled into the crowded driveway, I noticed several relatives I hadn't seen since our wedding, including Derek's cousins Robert and Lisa and his elderly Aunt Patricia. The moment we walked through the front door, the atmosphere felt hostile, in a way I had never experienced with this family before. Conversations died down when I approached, and people who had always been warm and welcoming now seemed to look through me as if I wasn't there. Derek's cousin Robert, who had always been friendly during previous gatherings, avoided eye contact entirely when I tried to greet him. His wife Jennifer, who had sent me a lovely thank you card just last month after I helped her daughter with a school project, turned away when she saw me approaching. Madison, however, was holding court near the kitchen island, surrounded by attentive relatives who hung on her every word. She had clearly arrived early and used the time to ensure everyone heard her version of events before I had a chance to defend myself. "Oh, there's Gail," Madison announced as she spotted me across the room. Her voice carried just the right note of concerned sympathy to make it clear that my presence was a source of family stress. "How are you holding up, sweetie? I know this whole situation has been so difficult for you." Derek's father, William, approached us with the kind of forced smile that indicated he was fulfilling a social obligation rather than expressing genuine pleasure at seeing me. "Gail," he said, his tone noticeably cooler than usual. "Madison's been telling us about the housing situation. It sounds like quite a complex problem." "It's not complex at all," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Madison's family has moved into my home without my permission and is trying to claim ownership of property they've never contributed to." William's expression grew uncomfortable, and he glanced toward Madison as if seeking guidance on how to handle my response. "Well, I'm sure you'll all work it out. Family disagreements always seem complicated from the outside." "This isn't a family disagreement," I said, my frustration beginning to show despite my efforts to remain calm. "This is theft." "Gail," Derek said quietly, placing a warning hand on my arm. "Maybe we should talk about this later." But Madison had heard my comment and was approaching with several other relatives in tow, including Derek's Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim. "Did someone say theft?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly across the room and drawing even more attention to our conversation. "I think there might be some confusion about the situation." She continued, addressing the growing crowd of family members rather than responding directly to me. "Property ownership can be so complicated, especially when emotions are involved." Aunt Carol nodded sympathetically. Madison explained about Derek's contribution to the down payment and how the legal paperwork was handled. "It sounds like there were some misunderstandings from the beginning." "There were no misunderstandings," I said, my voice rising despite Derek's continuing attempts to quiet me. "I bought that condo myself, I've made every payment, and I have documentation to prove it." "Documentation can be interpreted different ways," Uncle Jim said, his tone suggesting that my interpretation was clearly the wrong one. "What matters is family. Madison's children need stability, and Derek wants to help provide that. That should be something we all support." I looked around the room at faces that had once been warm and welcoming, now cold with judgment and disapproval. Madison had successfully painted me as the selfish outsider who was preventing 2 innocent children from having a stable home. "Those children have parents," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "Parents who are responsible for providing them with housing and stability." "Sometimes parents need help," Derek's cousin Lisa said, speaking up from across the room. "That's what family is for. I'm surprised you don't understand that, Gail." The criticism hit me like a physical blow. Lisa had always been one of my favorite members of Derek's family, a successful businesswoman who had seemed to respect my work ethic and independence. Hearing her echo Madison's narrative of family obligation and my supposed selfishness felt like losing an ally I hadn't even known I needed. Derek's elderly Aunt Patricia, who was 92 and generally treated with reverence by the entire family, slowly approached our group with the help of her walking cane. Everyone fell silent as she made her way toward me, clearly intending to share her perspective on the situation. "Young lady," she said, her voice still strong despite her advanced age. "In my day, wives understood their place in the family hierarchy. When a husband's family needed help, a good wife found ways to support that help, not create obstacles to it." The words stung more than anything else that had been said, coming from someone whose approval Derek had always sought, and whose opinions carried significant weight with the entire family. Patricia's judgment effectively ended any possibility that other family members might question Madison's narrative or support my position. As the evening progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated, standing alone, while Derek was drawn into conversations with relatives who made it clear that his loyalty to his sister was being closely monitored and evaluated. Madison moved through the party like a gracious hostess, accepting sympathy and support while positioning herself as the responsible family member trying to hold everything together. When we finally left the party, Derek and I drove home in silence. The damage to my relationship with his family felt irreparable, and I realized that Madison had succeeded in cutting me off from any potential allies or sources of support among the people who knew us best. "They all hate me now," I said as we pulled into our driveway. Derek sighed heavily. "They don't hate you. They just think you're being unreasonable about sharing the condo." "Sharing," I repeated. "Derek, they want me to give up ownership of my home and pay rent to live in a place I bought and paid for myself." "Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad arrangement," Derek said quietly. "Maybe it would be easier for everyone if we just found a way to make this work." I stared at my husband in the dim light of the car, realizing that Madison's manipulation had been so complete that he was now actively advocating for my surrender. She had successfully turned my own family against me, and Derek was no longer even pretending to be on my side. The stress of the past 2 weeks had been building like pressure in a steam kettle, and my body was beginning to show the effects in ways I couldn't ignore. I had been surviving on 3 hours of sleep per night. My appetite had disappeared entirely, and I found myself shaking at random moments throughout the day. But I was determined not to let Madison see any weakness, so I continued going to work and maintaining my normal routine, despite feeling like I was falling apart from the inside. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine presentation to our biggest potential client, a tech startup looking for comprehensive marketing support for their product launch. I had prepared extensively for this meeting, knowing that landing this account would not only secure my position at the company, but also provide the financial resources I desperately needed to fight Madison's legal claims. I was midway through explaining our proposed social media strategy when the words suddenly stopped coming. I stood at the front of the conference room staring at 12 expectant faces and felt my mind go completely blank. The PowerPoint slide on the screen might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics for all the sense it made to me in that moment. "Ms. Morrison," the client's CEO prompted gently, "you were saying about the engagement metrics." I tried to speak, but instead of words, what came out was a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The room began to spin, and I felt my knees buckle as darkness crept in from the edges of my vision. The last thing I remember was the sound of chairs scraping against the floor as people rushed to catch me. I woke up in the emergency room of St. Mary's Hospital with bright fluorescent lights stabbing into my eyes and the steady beep of monitoring equipment surrounding me. A young doctor with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair was checking my blood pressure, his expression serious but reassuring. "You're going to be okay," he said as I tried to sit up, "but you gave everyone quite a scare. Your blood pressure was dangerously elevated when the paramedics brought you in, and you were showing signs of severe exhaustion and dehydration." "I need to get back to work," I said weakly, though even the effort of speaking felt overwhelming. I was in the middle of an important presentation. "The only place you need to be right now is right here," the doctor replied firmly. "Ms. Morrison, when was the last time you had a full night's sleep? When did you last eat a complete meal?" I tried to remember but found that the past 2 weeks had blurred together into a haze of crisis management and constant anxiety. "I've been dealing with some family issues," I said, which felt like the understatement of the century. "Well, those family issues are literally making you sick," the doctor said, adjusting the IV line in my arm. "Your body is showing signs of chronic stress that, if left untreated, could lead to serious long-term health problems. High blood pressure, heart problems, compromised immune system, the works." As if summoned by some cruel cosmic joke, Madison appeared in the doorway of my hospital room less than an hour after I had regained consciousness. She was dressed in her most conservative outfit, her hair pulled back in a style that made her look responsible and concerned, and she carried a small bouquet of flowers that she had clearly picked up in the hospital gift shop. "Oh, Gail," she said, her voice heavy with what sounded like genuine worry to anyone who didn't know her true nature. "When Derek called me about your collapse, I came as quickly as I could. How are you feeling?" How did Derek even know I was here? I asked, confused about how news of my hospitalization had reached my husband so quickly. "Your supervisor called him as your emergency contact," Madison explained, settling into the chair beside my bed as if she had every right to be there. "Janet was very concerned about you. She mentioned that you've been under tremendous pressure lately." The doctor returned with my chart and a small cup of medication. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Dr. Garcia. I'd like to discuss your treatment plan and some lifestyle changes that will be necessary for your recovery." "Oh, I'm not Mrs. Morrison," Madison said quickly, extending her hand with a warm smile. "I'm Madison Morrison, her sister-in-law. I'm here to provide family support during this difficult time." Dr. Garcia glanced between us, clearly trying to assess the family dynamics and my level of comfort with Madison's presence. "Would you prefer to discuss your medical situation privately?" he asked me. Before I could answer, Madison launched into what sounded like a prepared speech about family unity and support systems. "Dr. Gail has been under tremendous stress lately due to some family financial issues. She's been trying to handle everything on her own, and I think that's part of what led to this health crisis." "What kind of financial issues?" Dr. Garcia asked, making notes in my chart. "Property disputes, legal complications, that sort of thing," Madison replied smoothly. "Gail has been very anxious about some changes in our family living situation. I've been trying to help her work through it, but she's been resistant to accepting support." I stared at Madison in amazement as she effortlessly repositioned herself as the concerned family member, trying to help me through a crisis that she had orchestrated. She was actually using my stress-induced hospitalization as evidence that I was unstable and in need of family intervention. "The important thing now is creating a stable, supportive environment for Gail's recovery." Madison continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone accustomed to managing family crises. "She needs to focus on her health rather than worrying about complex legal and financial matters." Dr. Garcia nodded thoughtfully. "Chronic stress can indeed impair judgment and decision-making capabilities. Is there family support available to help with these financial concerns while Ms. Morrison focuses on her recovery?" "Absolutely," Madison said quickly. "Derek and I have already been working to resolve the property issues so that Gail can stop worrying about them. Sometimes the best thing family can do is take care of the business details while someone recovers from a health crisis." I wanted to scream to explain that Madison was the source of all my stress and that her help was actually systematic theft disguised as family support. But I was weak, exhausted, and attached to monitoring equipment that would immediately alert the medical staff if my blood pressure spiked again. "That sounds like an excellent plan," Dr. Garcia said, making more notes. "Ms. Morrison, I'm going to prescribe some medication to help manage your blood pressure and anxiety levels. But the most important treatment is going to be stress reduction. You need to step back from whatever situations are causing this level of physical and emotional strain. As the doctor left to arrange my discharge paperwork, Madison leaned closer to my bed, her expression shifting from public concern to private satisfaction. "You see how this works, Gail," she said quietly. "The more you fight this, the more unstable you appear to everyone around you. Even your own doctor thinks you need family intervention now." She straightened up as Derek finally arrived, looking harried and worried. "How is she?" he asked Madison, rather than addressing me directly as if I were too fragile to speak for myself. "The doctor says she needs a stable, stress-free environment while she recovers," Madison replied. "I think it would be best if she stayed in the guest room for a while longer, just until her health improves." I closed my eyes and felt tears of frustration leak down my cheeks. Madison had managed to use my physical breakdown as further evidence that I was unfit to handle my own affairs, and she was positioning herself as the responsible family member, making difficult decisions for my own good. My release from the hospital came with strict instructions for bed rest stress management and a follow-up appointment with my primary care physician in 1 week. Derek drove me home in silence, periodically glancing at me with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for fragile mental patients or unstable explosives. Madison had prepared the guest room with fresh sheets, additional pillows, and a small arrangement of the flowers she had brought to the hospital. On the surface, it looked like caring family support, but I recognized it as another way of reinforcing my dependent status and keeping me isolated from the parts of the house that had once been mine. "You should rest now," Derek said, as he helped me settle into the narrow bed that had become my primary living space. "Madison's going to bring you some soup later, and she's arranged her schedule so someone can check on you throughout the day." The idea of being cared for by the person who had orchestrated my breakdown felt surreal, like being nursed back to health by your own poisoner. But I was too exhausted to argue, and my medication made everything feel distant and muffled, as if I were experiencing my life through thick glass. Derek left for work after ensuring I had water, medication, and his cell phone number prominently displayed on the nightstand. Madison disappeared to run errands with the boys, and Troy had gone to what he called a job interview, but which I suspected was actually a morning drinking session with his unemployed friends. For the first time in weeks, I found myself alone in the house I had once called home. The silence felt both peaceful and eerie after days of constant chaos and conflict. As my medication began to wear off and my mind cleared, I realized this might be my only opportunity to search for evidence of Madison's larger scheme. Moving carefully to avoid triggering another health crisis, I made my way to Madison's temporary bedroom, my former master bedroom. She had taken over the space completely, with her clothes filling the walk-in closet I had designed, and her personal belongings scattered across the surfaces I had once kept meticulously organized. Madison's laptop was sitting open on what used to be my vanity table, the screen dark but clearly not fully shut down. I knew I shouldn't invade her privacy, but my desperation overcame my usual ethical boundaries. I touched the trackpad, and the screen immediately came to life, revealing an email inbox that made my blood run cold. The most recent emails were between Madison and Patrick Westbrook, the attorney who had presented the forged ownership documents. But these weren't discussions about my case. They were communications about what appeared to be an ongoing pattern of similar scams targeting other family members. Robert Morrison property acquisition proceeding as planned. Read one email dated just 3 months earlier. Expect deed transfer completion by month end. Family resistance minimal due to emotional leverage regarding deceased mother's medical bills. I scrolled down, finding emails about Derek's cousin Lisa's house, his Aunt Patricia's veteran benefits, and even discussions about targeting Derek's elderly father's retirement savings. Madison wasn't just stealing from me. She was systematically robbing Derek's entire family using emotional manipulation, forged documents, and exploitation of family loyalty. Another email chain revealed communications with what appeared to be other family members in different cities, people whose names I didn't recognize, but who seemed to be sharing strategies for property theft and financial exploitation. Madison was part of a network of scammers who specialized in targeting their own families. Target acquired family trust through deceased parent narrative, read one particularly chilling message, recommend accelerating timeline before Target seeks independent legal advice, property transfer must appear voluntary to avoid criminal investigation. I realized that Madison's attack on me wasn't personal. It was simply business. She had identified me as a vulnerable target with valuable assets and had deployed a systematic approach that she had clearly used successfully before. The forged documents, the workplace sabotage, even the deliberately caused property damage were all part of a proven strategy. Most shocking of all was an email thread discussing the sale of properties once they had been acquired. Madison had no intention of living in my condo long term. She planned to force me out, gain legal control, and then sell the property for cash while leaving her own family homeless in the process. Property resale value estimated at $450,000. Read one assessment. Recommend quick sale to avoid family interference. Target relocation to assisted living facility will eliminate future complications. The assisted living facility comment made me realize that Madison's ultimate plan wasn't just to steal my home. It was to have me declared mentally unstable and institutionalized, removing me as a threat permanently while gaining control of all my assets. I heard car doors slamming in the driveway and quickly closed the laptop, my heart racing as I hurried back to the guest room. Madison's voice carried through the house as she directed the boys to put away groceries and reminded Troy about some task he had apparently forgotten to complete. As I lay in the narrow bed staring at the ceiling and trying to process what I had discovered, I felt a strange sense of clarity replacing the despair that had consumed me for weeks. Madison wasn't the concerned family member she pretended to be. She was a professional criminal who had made a career out of exploiting family relationships for financial gain. But more importantly, I now knew that I wasn't her only victim. Derek's cousin Robert and Aunt Patricia had been targeted using identical methods, and there were probably others who had been too ashamed or confused to speak up about their experiences. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope stirring in my chest. Madison's greatest strength, her ability to isolate and manipulate individual family members, might also be her greatest weakness. If I could find the other victims and convince them to stand together, we might have enough evidence and testimony to expose her criminal network and recover what she had stolen from all of us. The question was whether I could contact them without Madison discovering my plans, and whether they would be willing to risk further family conflict by fighting back against someone who had positioned herself so expertly as the caring matriarch holding everyone together. 3 days into my supposed recovery period, I received a phone call that changed everything. The number was unfamiliar, and I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another creditor or someone Madison had contacted to harass me. But something made me pick up on the fourth ring. Gail. This is Lisa Morrison, Derek's cousin. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I got your number from the family directory. I heard about your hospitalization, and I wanted to check on you. Lisa's voice carried a tone I couldn't immediately identify. Concern mixed with something else. Something that sounded almost conspiratorial. I remembered her from the birthday party where she had seemed to support Madison's narrative about family obligation and my supposed selfishness. That's kind of you to call, I said carefully, unsure where this conversation was heading. I'm feeling much better. I'm sure you are, Lisa said, and then her voice dropped to a whisper. Gail, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Madison been showing you legal documents that claim she has ownership rights to your property? My heart stopped. How did you know that? Because she did the exact same thing to me 2 years ago. Lisa said, her voice heavy with a mixture of anger and regret. She stole my mother's house using forged documents and emotional manipulation, and she's been systematically targeting other family members ever since. The relief I felt at hearing those words was so overwhelming that I started crying. For weeks, I had felt like I was going insane, like I was the only person who could see through Madison's facade of family concern. Now I had confirmation that my suspicions were not only correct, but that I wasn't alone. "Can you meet somewhere private?" Lisa asked. "I have information you need to see, and there are other family members who've been affected by Madison's schemes. We've been waiting for the right opportunity to expose her, and I think that opportunity might be now." We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop 20 minutes away from my house, a place where we were unlikely to encounter anyone from Derek's family. I told Derek I was going to the pharmacy to pick up my medication, which wasn't entirely a lie since I did need to stop there on my way home. Lisa was already waiting when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a thick folder of papers spread across the table. She looked older than I remembered, with stress lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. Beside her sat a man I recognized as Derek's cousin Robert, and an elderly woman I had met briefly at family gatherings, but whose name I couldn't recall. "Gail," Lisa said, standing to hug me with genuine warmth. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be confusing, but I promise everything will make sense soon. This is Robert, and this is Aunt Patricia, Derek's grandmother's sister." Patricia extended a weathered hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who appeared to be in her 80s. "My dear," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being respected, "I owe you an apology. At William's party, I spoke to you very harshly about family, loyalty, and a wife's duties. I had no idea what Madison was really doing to you." Robert leaned forward, his expression serious. "We all owe you an apology. Madison has been very careful to keep her victims isolated from each other. She told each of us that we were the only family member having problems, that everyone else supported her decisions. She told me the same thing," I said, settling into the booth beside Patricia. "She made it seem like I was being unreasonable and selfish for not wanting to share my home." Lisa opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. "These are copies of the forged papers Madison used to steal my mother's house. Look at the signatures, the legal language, the notarization stamps. They're identical to what she's probably showing you." I studied the documents, noting the similarities to what Patrick Westbrook had presented in my kitchen. The same legal terminology, the same type of official-looking seals, even the same format for the fabricated ownership agreements. "My mother died 18 months ago." Lisa continued, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "She left the house to me in her will with clear documentation and proper legal procedures, but Madison produced these papers claiming that Mom had secretly signed over 50% ownership to her as payment for caregiving services." "Caregiving services," I repeated. "But Madison lived 3 states away during your mother's illness." "Exactly," Robert said. "But Madison convinced the probate court that she had been providing financial support and emotional care through phone calls and visits. She even had fake receipts for medical expenses she claimed to have paid." Patricia spoke up, her voice heavy with shame. "She did something similar to me with my late husband's veteran benefits. Madison convinced me that there had been an error in the government payments, that I had been receiving money I wasn't entitled to, and that she needed to help me navigate the bureaucracy to fix the problem." "What really happened?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "She had me sign papers that I thought were correction forms for the VA," Patricia said, "but they were actually documents transferring my benefit payments to an account she controlled. By the time I realized what had happened, she had taken nearly $40,000. The scope of Madison's criminal operation was staggering. She wasn't just an opportunistic thief. She was running a sophisticated long-term scam that targeted her own family members, using their love and trust against them." "How many others?" I asked. Robert consulted a notebook filled with handwritten notes. "That we know of, at least 7 family members over the past 5 years, probably more who haven't come forward because they're too embarrassed or afraid of causing family drama. She's very good at making her victims feel like they're the problem," Lisa added. "She positions herself as the caring family member trying to help while making us look greedy or selfish for questioning her motives. I thought about my experience at Derek's father's birthday party where Madison had successfully turned the entire extended family against me using exactly those tactics. So what do we do if she has the whole family convinced that she's the good person and we're the troublemakers? How do we expose her without looking like we're ganging up on her? Patricia smiled for the first time since I had sat down, and I caught a glimpse of the sharp intelligence that had probably served her well during her 90-plus years of life. My dear Madison's greatest strength is also her greatest weakness. She can't resist an opportunity to appear generous and caring in front of the whole family. What do you mean? I asked. She thrives on public recognition for her family devotion, Robert explained. She always wants to be the center of attention at family gatherings, the one everyone thanks for keeping the family together. Lisa leaned forward, her eyes bright with something that looked like anticipation. We think we can use that against her, but we're going to need your help, and it's going to require you to pretend to surrender everything she wants. Our plan required careful preparation and perfect timing. Over the next week, while maintaining the appearance of defeated compliance, I worked with Lisa, Robert, and Patricia to build our case against Madison. They introduced me to someone who would become our secret weapon, Sarah Campbell, an attorney who specialized in elder abuse and family financial fraud. Sarah was nothing like Patrick Westbrook. Where he had been slick and intimidating, she was direct and compassionate. She listened to our stories with the focused attention of someone who had seen similar cases before and knew exactly how to build a strong, legal response. What Madison is doing is called affinity fraud, Sarah explained during our first meeting at her office. She's using family relationships and emotional manipulation to gain access to assets that don't belong to her. It's actually more common than people realize, but it's rarely prosecuted because victims are afraid of destroying family relationships. Sarah had brought in a private investigator named Marcus Webb, a former police detective who had experience with financial crimes. Marcus was a quiet man with observant eyes who took detailed notes as each of us recounted our experiences with Madison's manipulation. The good news is that Madison has been sloppy, Marcus told us after reviewing our evidence. She's used the same methods repeatedly, which creates a clear pattern that will be easy to demonstrate in court. The forged documents all have similar flaws, and her timeline of supposed family obligations doesn't match reality. What kind of flaws? I asked, curious about the technical aspects of Madison's deception. Sarah pulled out copies of the various documents Madison had used across her different schemes. The notarization stamps are fake. They're all from the same source, probably purchased online. The legal language contains errors that a real attorney wouldn't make. And most importantly, several of these documents are supposedly dated from times when Madison was verifiably living in different states. She also made a critical error with your case, Gail. Marcus added, consulting his notes. The bank records showing Derek's transfers to Madison actually work in our favor. They prove that any financial support was coming from your joint marital assets, not from Derek's independent resources. This was news to me. What does that mean legally? It means that under state law, Madison was essentially being supported by your income without your knowledge or consent, Sarah explained. Derek can't legally give away marital assets without your approval, especially not to fund ongoing support for another adult. But our strongest advantage came from an unexpected source. Patricia, despite her advanced age, had been meticulously documenting Madison's behavior for months, keeping copies of every suspicious document and recording every conversation where Madison made claims about family obligations or financial arrangements. My late husband was an accountant, Patricia explained with a sly smile. He taught me to always keep careful records, especially when money is involved. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. Her documentation included recorded phone calls where Madison discussed her plans to claim property rights copies of checks that proved Madison's false claims about providing financial support, and even photographs of Madison's expensive purchases made during the same periods when she claimed to be struggling financially. This is incredible evidence, Sarah said, reviewing Patricia's files. "Mrs. Henderson, you've essentially documented a pattern of fraud that spans several years." Patricia's last name was Henderson, not Morrison, which explained why I hadn't immediately connected her to Derek's family tree. She was actually his great-aunt, his grandmother's sister, and had been watching Madison's behavior with growing suspicion for years. The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity. We would stage a public confrontation during Derek's father's upcoming wedding anniversary party, an event where the entire extended family would be present. I would appear to surrender presenting Madison with documents that looked like a property transfer agreement, but were actually a detailed confession to fraud witnessed by everyone present. "The key is making Madison feel so confident about her victory that she doesn't read the documents carefully before signing," Marcus explained. "We need her to incriminate herself in front of the maximum number of witnesses." "What if she realizes what's happening before she signs?" I asked. "Then we still have all the evidence we've already gathered," Sarah replied. "But this approach gives us the best chance of getting a confession that can't be disputed later. Plus, it exposes her methods to the entire family, simultaneously making it impossible for her to continue manipulating individual members." Over the following days, I had to maintain the appearance of defeated compliance while secretly preparing for Madison's downfall. This meant continuing to sleep in the guest room, accepting her false concern about my health, and allowing her to make decisions about our shared living space. The hardest part was not telling Derek what we had discovered. Sarah had advised against bringing him into our plans until the confrontation, arguing that Derek's genuine surprise would be crucial to selling Madison on the authenticity of my surrender. "Derek is as much a victim of her manipulation as you are," Sarah had explained. "His shock and confusion will actually help convince Madison that this is a real surrender rather than a trap." But watching Derek continue to support his sister's lies, knowing that he was unknowingly participating in my financial destruction, required every ounce of self-control I possessed. When he suggested that maybe Madison's rental arrangement wasn't such a bad idea, I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming that his sister was a career criminal who'd been robbing his family for years. The anniversary party was scheduled for the following Saturday. Madison had volunteered to help with the planning, positioning herself once again as the caring daughter-in-law who stepped up to support family events. She had even suggested that the party would be a perfect opportunity for me to publicly announce my decision to share the condo, framing it as a gesture of family unity that would heal the recent tensions. "I think it would mean so much to everyone if you could make a little speech," Madison had said with false sincerity, "something about how family comes first and how happy you are to provide stability for Carson and Blake." "That sounds like a wonderful idea," I had replied, knowing that she would indeed get a speech she would never forget. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made everything feel sharper and more vivid. Derek's father, William, and his wife Margaret were celebrating their 35th wedding anniversary with a backyard party that would bring together nearly 40 members of Derek's extended family. I spent extra time getting ready, choosing a conservative dress that would make me appear respectful and compliant, while Sarah, Marcus, Lisa, Robert, and Patricia made their own preparations for what we hoped would be Madison's final performance as the concerned family matriarch. Madison was in an exceptionally good mood as we drove to the party, chatting cheerfully about her plans to redecorate the condo and discussing potential schools for Carson and Blake in our neighborhood. Her confidence was absolute. She clearly believed that my public surrender would cement her victory and end any remaining family doubts about her claims. "I'm so proud of you for deciding to do the right thing, Gail," she said from the passenger seat, while Derek concentrated on navigating the Saturday afternoon traffic. "Family unity is so much more important than individual property rights. Your willingness to share shows real maturity." Derek glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his expression a mixture of relief and residual guilt. "I think Mom would have been really happy to see the family coming together like this," he said softly. If only he knew what his mother had actually written about Madison in those hidden letters, I thought. But he would find out soon enough. The party was already in full swing when we arrived. William and Margaret had decorated their backyard with white lights and flowers, creating a warm and festive atmosphere that felt almost surreal given what was about to happen. Children ran between the tables while adults clustered in conversation groups, everyone dressed in their finest casual attire for the celebration. Madison immediately began working the crowd, greeting relatives with warm hugs, and ensuring that everyone knew about my planned announcement. She had clearly built this moment up as the resolution to weeks of family drama, positioning herself as the peacemaker who had guided everyone toward harmony. Gail has something special she wants to share with everyone later, Madison announced to anyone who would listen. She's made a really beautiful decision about putting family first. Sarah Campbell arrived fashionably late, introduced by Patricia as her attorney, who was helping with some estate planning matters. Marcus Webb came separately invited by Lisa as her guest for the evening. To anyone watching casually, they appeared to be ordinary plus ones rather than key participants in an elaborate sting operation. I spent the first hour of the party mingling and accepting congratulations from relatives who believed they were witnessing my mature acceptance of family responsibility. Several people mentioned how much they respected my decision to prioritize Madison's children over my own comfort, and I had to resist the urge to enlighten them about what was really happening. Derek's Aunt Carol approached me near the refreshment table, her expression warm with approval. "Gail, I owe you an apology for some of the things I said last week. I realize now that this situation must have been very difficult for you, and I'm impressed by how you've handled it." "Family is complicated," I replied carefully, sticking to the script we had rehearsed, "but I've learned a lot about what really matters." Madison overheard this exchange and beamed with satisfaction. "Gail has been such a wonderful example of how to put children's needs first," she said, placing a possessive hand on my shoulder. "Carson and Blake are so lucky to have such a generous aunt." As the evening progressed and more guests arrived, I noticed Sarah discreetly positioning herself near the main gathering area, where speeches and announcements typically took place during family events. Marcus had found a spot with a clear view of the entire party, and I knew he was recording everything on a device hidden in his jacket. Lisa, Robert, and Patricia spread out among the crowd, ready to serve as witnesses and to manage family reactions once the truth came out. We had agreed that they would remain silent during the initial confrontation, allowing Madison to dig her own hole before revealing their involvement in exposing her crimes. William called for everyone's attention as the sun began to set, gathering the family for the traditional anniversary speech and any other announcements people wanted to make. Margaret stood beside him, glowing with happiness as she looked out over the assembled relatives. "Margaret and I are so grateful that all of you could be here tonight." William began, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. 35 years of marriage has taught us that family is the most precious thing we have, and seeing all of you together reminds us why that's true." Madison had positioned herself prominently in the front of the gathering, with Derek beside her and Carson and Blake, flanking them like a perfect family portrait. She kept glancing at me expectantly, clearly eager for my moment of public surrender. Before we cut the cake, William continued, "I understand that some family members have announcements they'd like to share. Madison mentioned that Gail has something important to say about family unity." "Actually," Madison interjected with a bright smile, "why don't I introduce Gail's announcement? She's made such a generous decision, and I want to make sure everyone understands how much it means to our family." This was even better than we had planned. Madison was about to position herself as the primary beneficiary of my supposed generosity, making her subsequent downfall even more dramatic and public. "Please go ahead," I said graciously, gesturing for Madison to take center stage. Madison stepped forward, her confidence radiating as she addressed the assembled family. "As many of you know, our family has been going through some complicated times recently, with housing issues and financial pressures affecting several of us. But I'm happy to announce that Gail has made the beautiful decision to share her condo with Derek's family, ensuring that Carson and Blake have a stable home environment." She paused for effect, allowing the murmurs of approval to ripple through the crowd before continuing. Gail has prepared some legal documents that will formalize this arrangement, and I think it would be meaningful for all of us to witness her signature as a celebration of family solidarity. Sarah stepped forward at that moment, introducing herself as Patricia's attorney and offering to notarize any documents that needed official witnessing. "I'd be happy to ensure everything is properly documented," she said with professional authority. Madison's eyes lit up with delight. Having a real attorney present would make the property transfer appear even more legitimate and binding. She had no way of knowing that Sarah was actually my attorney, or that the documents I was about to present contained a very different kind of legal language than what Madison expected. "That would be wonderful," Madison said. "Gail, did you bring the papers we discussed?" I reached into my purse and withdrew a folder containing what appeared to be standard property transfer documents. Madison accepted them with obvious satisfaction, clearly anticipating the moment when she would officially gain legal control of my home. "Would you like to review these before signing?" I asked innocently. Madison waved away my suggestion with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already predetermined. "I trust that everything is in order," she said. "After all, we're family." Madison opened the folder with ceremonial flourish, clearly expecting to find documents that would grant her family permanent residency rights in my condo. What she found instead were detailed confessions to multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and theft, written in language that left no room for misinterpretation. For a moment, Madison's expression remained confident as she glanced at the first page. Then her face went pale as she began to read the actual content. "I, Madison Morrison, hereby confess to the systematic theft of family assets through forged documents and emotional manipulation," the document began. "Over the past 5 years, I have used fabricated legal papers to steal property from Lisa Morrison, Patricia Henderson, Robert Morrison, and others, while claiming to act in their best interests." Madison's hands began to shake as she continued reading. The document laid out her entire criminal enterprise in precise detail, including dates, amounts stolen, and methods used to manipulate each victim. It described her partnership with Patrick Westbrook in creating fraudulent legal documents and her systematic campaign to isolate and financially exploit vulnerable family members. "What is this?" Madison whispered, her voice barely audible as the blood drained from her face. "Keep reading," I said gently. "You'll find it very thorough." The assembled family watched in growing confusion as Madison's confident demeanor crumbled. Derek stepped closer to his sister, trying to see what had caused such a dramatic change in her behavior. "Madison," he said uncertainly, "what's wrong?" Sarah Campbell stepped forward, her professional authority immediately commanding the attention of everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen, what Madison is reading is a detailed confession to multiple felonies committed against members of this family over the past several years." A collective gasp rose from the crowd as people began to understand that something far more serious than a property dispute was being revealed. Margaret clutched William's arm while several family members moved closer to get a better view of the unfolding drama. This confession documents Madison's theft of Lisa Morrison's inherited house through forged documents, her appropriation of Patricia Henderson's veteran benefits through fraudulent paperwork, her embezzlement of Robert Morrison's business assets, and her current attempt to steal Gail's condominium using identical methods. Madison tried to crumple the papers, but Marcus Webb appeared beside her with quiet authority. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to keep those documents intact. They're evidence in an ongoing criminal investigation." "Who are you?" Madison demanded, her voice rising with panic. "Marcus Webb, private investigator," he replied, displaying his credentials. "I've been documenting your criminal activities for the past several weeks at the request of your victims." Derek stared at his sister in shock, clearly struggling to process what he was hearing. "Madison, this can't be true. Tell them this is some kind of mistake." But Madison's reaction made it impossible for anyone to believe in her innocence. Instead of righteous indignation or confused denial, she displayed the desperate panic of someone whose carefully constructed lies had suddenly collapsed. "You don't understand," she said, her voice becoming shrill. "Everything I did was for family. The children needed stability, and these people had more than they needed. I was just redistributing resources to where they were needed most." "You were stealing," Lisa said, stepping forward from the crowd with quiet dignity. "You stole my mother's house while I was grieving her death, and you made me feel guilty for questioning your claims." Patricia joined Lisa, her elderly frame, somehow radiating moral authority despite her small stature. "You took my husband's veteran benefits and convinced me I was the one who had made an error. You made me doubt my own memory and feel ashamed for questioning family." Robert appeared beside them, completing the circle of Madison's victims. "You destroyed my small business by manipulating me into signing loan documents I didn't understand, then convinced the family that I was irresponsible with money." The family watched in stunned silence as 3 people they had believed were Madison's supporters revealed themselves to be her victims. Derek looked from his sister to the assembled evidence, his face showing the dawning realization that everything he had been told was a lie. "Derek," Madison said desperately, reaching for her brother's arm, "you know I would never hurt family. These people are trying to turn you against me. Remember what Mom said about family loyalty." But Derek stepped back, his expression hardening as he finally understood the scope of his sister's deception. What did Mom really say? Madison, not your version. What did she actually say? Sarah produced copies of Helen Morrison's letters, the ones Derek had hidden and Madison had claimed didn't exist. "Your mother's actual words were quite different from what Madison told you," Sarah said, handing Derek the letters. "She specifically warned you about Madison's manipulative behavior and expressed her love and respect for Gail." Derek read his mother's actual words with growing horror, realizing that Madison had twisted their dying mother's wishes into weapons against his marriage. "She left me money," he said quietly, looking up at Madison with betrayal in his eyes. $10,000 that was supposed to help Gail and me build our life together. Where is it, Madison? Madison's last defense crumbled as she realized that even Derek now understood her deception. "I used it to help my family," she said weakly. The children needed honest parents." Derek interrupted, his voice stronger than I had heard it in weeks. "Not parents who steal from their own family and teach them that lying and manipulation are acceptable." William stepped forward, his face grave with the authority of the family patriarch. "Madison, I think you need to leave. Tonight. Take your family and go. And don't come back until you've made this right." "You can't throw me out," Madison protested. "I'm family. We have nowhere to go." "You should have considered that before you decided to steal from your family," Patricia said with quiet firmness. "Actions have consequences, dear, even for family members." As the full scope of Madison's crimes became clear to everyone present, the family's support for her evaporated completely. People who had defended her manipulation of me just weeks earlier now looked at her with disgust and disappointment. Troy, who had been conspicuously quiet during the entire confrontation, finally spoke up. "Madison, I told you this would catch up with us eventually. I've been recording your planning sessions for months, waiting for you to go too far." Even Madison's own husband had been secretly gathering evidence against her, apparently preparing for the moment when her criminal behavior would finally be exposed. Carson and Blake watched their mother's humiliation with the confused fear of children who had suddenly realized that their entire lives had been built on lies and stolen money. The party ended with Madison's family loading their belongings into their car under the watchful eyes of Marcus Webb and several family members who wanted to ensure they actually left. Madison made one final attempt to salvage her position by appealing to family loyalty and concern for her children, but her credibility had been completely destroyed. As their car disappeared down the street, Derek turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Gail, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to begin making this right. The week following Madison's public exposure brought swift and comprehensive justice that exceeded even our most optimistic expectations. Troy's secretly recorded conversations provided federal prosecutors with evidence of interstate fraud that triggered FBI involvement, while Marcus Webb's investigation had uncovered financial crimes spanning multiple states and involving amounts far larger than any of us had realized. Madison's network of fraudulent activity extended beyond Derek's family to include victims in 3 other states, with total theft amounts exceeding $600,000 over 7 years. What we had thought was personal manipulation turned out to be part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been operating under the radar by targeting family relationships that victims were reluctant to report. Patrick Westbrook, the attorney who had presented the forged documents in my kitchen, was arrested at his office on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and criminal document forgery. His law license was immediately suspended pending investigation, and authorities discovered that he had been providing fraudulent legal services to multiple family-based theft rings across the region. But the most satisfying justice came from unexpected quarters. Troy's decision to cooperate with investigators led to revelations that even Madison hadn't anticipated. He provided evidence that Madison had been planning to abandon him and their children once she gained control of my condo, intending to sell the property and disappear with the proceeds. She had already started looking at properties in Florida. Troy told investigators, his voice heavy with betrayal. She was planning to leave me and the boys homeless while she started a new life with money stolen from people who trusted her. The recordings Troy had made revealed Madison discussing her exit strategy in chilling detail. She had viewed her own family as disposable assets useful only as long as they provided cover for her criminal activities and sympathy for her housing needs. Carson and Blake, who had been innocent pawns in their mother's schemes, were spared the worst consequences through Derek's father's intervention. William petitioned for temporary custody of his grandsons, providing them with stability, while their parents faced criminal proceedings. "Those boys deserve better than what Madison and Troy gave them," William told the family court judge. "They've been raised thinking that manipulation and theft are normal family behaviors, and they need time to learn what healthy relationships actually look like." The children adapted to their new environment with surprising resilience, apparently relieved to be free from the constant chaos and deception that had characterized their lives with Madison. Carson confessed to Derek that he had been uncomfortable with the damage they had caused to my home, but had been afraid to speak up because Madison had taught them that family loyalty meant never questioning her decisions. Madison herself faced federal charges that carried potential prison sentences of up to 20 years. Her bail was set impossibly high after prosecutors argued that she represented a flight risk with a history of abandoning family members when her schemes were discovered. More importantly for the rest of us, the criminal investigation led to asset recovery that returned most of the stolen property to its rightful owners. Lisa regained title to her mother's house. Patricia recovered her veteran benefits, plus interest and penalties, and Robert received compensation for his business losses through a federal victim restitution program. My own financial situation improved dramatically once the theft charges were filed. The forged ownership documents Madison had used were exposed as criminal evidence, making my sole ownership of the condo legally unquestionable. Additionally, the money Derek had transferred to Madison over the years was recoverable through the criminal restitution process. Derek's transformation throughout this process was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire experience. Seeing his sister's true nature forced him to confront his own patterns of manipulation and conflict avoidance that had made him vulnerable to her schemes. I've been in therapy twice a week since the party. Derek told me as we worked together to repair the damage Madison's family had caused to our home. I'm learning about something called enmeshment and how Madison trained me from childhood to prioritize her needs over everyone else's, including my own wife's. The therapy was helping Derek understand that his mother's death had made him especially vulnerable to Madison's emotional manipulation. His grief and guilt about not being able to save Helen had created an opening for Madison to exploit using fabricated deathbed wishes to control his behavior and financial decisions. "Mom never asked me to choose Madison over you," Derek said, tears in his eyes as he helped me repaint the guest room that had temporarily served as my bedroom. "She asked me to build a strong marriage and to be careful about Madison's tendency to create drama and demand attention. I completely failed to honor what she actually wanted." Our marriage counseling sessions were challenging but productive, focusing on rebuilding trust and establishing new boundaries that would protect us from future manipulation attempts. Derek had to learn how to recognize emotional manipulation tactics, while I had to work through the trauma of having my financial security threatened by people I had trusted. The restoration of our home took several months, but the process became a kind of healing ritual that helped us reclaim our space and our relationship. Derek insisted on paying for all repairs himself, using money from his inheritance that he had previously hidden from me at Madison's suggestion. "This should have been ours from the beginning," he said, as we selected new flooring to replace the damage Madison's family had caused. "Mom left that money specifically to help us build our life together, and I let Madison convince me to give it away instead." But perhaps the most meaningful justice came from the transformation in Derek's extended family's attitude toward both criminal behavior and family loyalty. The public exposure of Madison's crimes had forced everyone to examine their own assumptions about family obligation and the difference between genuine support and enabling destructive behavior. We all learned that real family loyalty means protecting each other from harm, not covering up harmful behavior. Patricia reflected during a family dinner 6 months after Madison's arrest. Madison taught us to confuse loyalty with complicity, and it nearly destroyed several innocent people. The family established new traditions around financial transparency and emotional support that made future manipulation attempts much less likely to succeed. William created a family trust that required multiple approvals for any significant financial decisions, while several family members began meeting regularly to share concerns and provide genuine support for each other's challenges. Madison's children thrived in this healthier environment, learning for the first time what authentic family relationships look like when they weren't based on manipulation and exploitation. Carson and Blake began attending counseling to help them process their experiences and develop healthy relationship skills their mother had never taught them. As I watched Derek playing catch with his nephews in our backyard, I realized that Madison's crimes had ultimately brought our family closer together by forcing everyone to confront the difference between genuine care and manipulative control. The boys were learning that real love didn't require them to sacrifice their integrity or hurt other people to prove their loyalty. Justice had been served not just through the legal system, but through the healing and growth that came from exposing the truth and choosing healthier ways of relating to each other. 1 year later, I stood in my beautifully restored condo kitchen, holding the court document that officially closed Madison's criminal case. She had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, during which she would be prohibited from handling financial matters for any family members and required to pay restitution to all her victims. The kitchen looked better than it ever had before, with new appliances Derek and I had chosen together and a fresh coat of paint that covered the last traces of the chaos Madison's family had brought into our lives. More importantly, the space felt truly ours again, protected by legal boundaries and emotional growth that made future manipulation attempts impossible. Derek approached from behind, wrapping his arms around my waist and looking over my shoulder at the official paperwork. "Hard to believe it's really over," he said softly. "The legal part is over," I corrected gently. "The healing part is ongoing." Our marriage had survived, but it had been fundamentally changed by the experience. Derek's therapy had helped him recognize his lifelong patterns of conflict avoidance and people-pleasing that had made him vulnerable to Madison's manipulation. He had learned to set boundaries with family members and to prioritize our partnership over external pressure for family harmony. I got a letter from Carson yesterday. Derek mentioned settling beside me at our kitchen table. He made the honor roll at school, and he wanted to thank us for helping him and Blake stay with Grandpa instead of going into foster care. The boys had flourished in William's stable household, where they learned that family love didn't require them to participate in illegal activities or cover up harmful behavior. Carson, now 14, had developed an interest in law enforcement after seeing how investigators had protected his family from his mother's crimes. Blake had discovered a talent for art and was using creative expression to process his complex feelings about his mother's choices. He also said Madison writes to them sometimes from prison. Derek continued. But they've decided they don't want to respond until she completes the counseling program and proves she understands what she did wrong. The boys' decision to maintain boundaries with their mother showed remarkable maturity for children their age, though it had been supported by extensive counseling and the unwavering stability William provided. They were learning that loving someone didn't mean accepting harmful behavior or sacrificing their own well-being to maintain a relationship. Our home had become a gathering place for the family members who had been Madison's victims, providing a safe space where Lisa, Robert, and Patricia could share their ongoing recovery processes and support each other's healing. We had created what our therapist called chosen family relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care, rather than obligation and manipulation. Lisa had returned to her mother's house, which had been fully restored to her through the criminal restitution process. She had started a support group for family fraud victims, helping other people who had experienced similar betrayals navigate both the legal and emotional aspects of recovery. The hardest part isn't the financial damage, Lisa often told new group members. It's learning to trust your own judgment again after someone you loved convinced you that your reality wasn't valid. Patricia, despite her advanced age, had become an advocate for elder abuse prevention, speaking at community centers and senior facilities about the warning signs of family financial exploitation. Her sharp wit and obvious intelligence made her an effective spokesperson for the message that age didn't make someone automatically vulnerable to manipulation. The key is documentation. She would tell her audiences, always carrying the meticulously organized files that had helped expose Madison's crimes. Trust your instincts, keep careful records, and remember that real family members want you to feel comfortable asking questions about financial arrangements. Robert had rebuilt his small business with the help of the restitution payments and had hired Carson part-time to help with basic office tasks. The mentoring relationship gave Carson positive male role models while providing Robert with assistance from someone who understood the importance of ethical business practices. Our own relationship with Derek's father had strengthened considerably through the shared experience of protecting Carson and Blake. William had stepped into his role as their primary guardian, with dedication and wisdom, creating the stable environment the boys needed while managing the complex emotions of having his daughter incarcerated for crimes against his own family. I failed Madison somehow. William confided during one of our family dinners. I don't know if I was too permissive when she was young or if I missed warning signs that she was developing these manipulative patterns. You gave her the same love and support you gave Derek, I replied. People make their own choices about how to use what they're given. Madison chose manipulation and theft over honest work and genuine relationships. Derek's therapy had helped him understand that his mother's actual wishes had been for him to build a strong, independent marriage while maintaining healthy but boundaried relationships with his extended family. Helen's letters had explicitly praised my work ethic and character, expressing hope that Derek and I would support each other's dreams, rather than sacrificing individual goals for family pressure. Mom would have been horrified by what Madison did, Derek said as we prepared for our weekly family dinner with William and the boys. She would have supported our decision to press charges and protect other family members from future harm. The legal victory had been satisfying, but the emotional healing had been more meaningful. Derek and I had learned to communicate directly about our needs and concerns, rather than assuming the other person should intuitively understand unspoken expectations. We had established new traditions around financial transparency and decision-making that strengthened our partnership. Our home security system now included not just physical protection, but emotional boundaries that prevented anyone from using family loyalty as justification for harmful behavior. We had learned to distinguish between genuine requests for help and manipulative attempts to exploit our resources or guilt. The restored condo had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose honesty and mutual support over manipulation and exploitation. Friends and family members often commented on the peaceful atmosphere of our home, noting that it felt genuinely welcoming rather than performatively perfect. "This place feels like a real sanctuary," Patricia observed during one of our Sunday dinners. "It's the kind of home where people can be authentically themselves without worrying about judgment or hidden agendas." As I prepared dinner that evening, I reflected on how completely our lives had changed since that terrible day when Madison had first announced her intention to claim my home. The financial theft had been recovered, but more importantly, we had all learned to create relationships based on genuine care rather than obligation and manipulation. Derek appeared in the kitchen as I was setting the table carrying flowers from the garden we had planted together in the spring. "I have something for you," he said, his expression combining nervousness with excitement. He handed me a small wrapped box that I recognized as coming from the jewelry store where we had bought our wedding rings 7 years earlier. Inside was a simple pendant engraved with words from one of his mother's letters, "Love that empowers growth." "I wanted to give you something that represents what we've learned," Derek explained as he fastened the necklace around my neck. "Real love helps people become stronger and more independent, not weaker and more dependent." The pendant felt warm against my skin, a tangible reminder of the journey we had taken from manipulation to authentic partnership. Helen Morrison's actual wisdom had finally triumphed over Madison's twisted interpretation of family loyalty. As our chosen family gathered around our dinner table that evening, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the painful experience that had ultimately led us to stronger, healthier relationships. Madison's crimes had forced all of us to examine our assumptions about love, loyalty, and family obligation, leading to connections that were more genuine and supportive than anything we had experienced before. Carson raised his water glass in a toast that had become our family tradition. To families that help each other grow instead of holding each other back. To chosen family, Derek added, looking around the table at faces that reflected genuine affection and mutual respect. To truth-telling, Patricia contributed with a sly smile and careful record-keeping. As we clinked glasses and began sharing stories from our week, I realized that Madison's betrayal had ultimately given us the greatest gift imaginable, the knowledge that we could survive the worst kind of family crisis and emerge stronger, wiser, and more authentically connected to each other. My home was secure, my marriage was thriving, and my chosen family was built on foundations of honesty and mutual support that no amount of manipulation could ever shake again. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who was taking advantage of your kindness? Family relationships can be some of the most complex and challenging to navigate, especially when someone uses emotional manipulation to justify harmful behavior. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. Remember, setting boundaries with family members isn't selfish. It's necessary for everyone's well-being. Real love empowers people to grow and become their best selves rather than demanding sacrifice and compliance. If you found this story meaningful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming family challenges and building authentic relationships. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect yourself from manipulation, even when it comes from people you love. Thank you for joining me on Gail's journey from betrayal to triumph. Remember, you have the right to protect your home, your finances, and your peace of mind, no matter what anyone else tries to tell you about family obligation. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.